In the previous videos, we talked about the marquee tools, which allow you to make selections based on regular shapes. Now let's talk about the lasso tools, which allow you to make selections that have irregular shapes. Let's begin first with the lasso tool. If you had a very steady hand and you were really good at being able to trace around an object, the lasso tool would be what you would use. For example, I would click and then make a selection around an object. Most people don't really have a very steady hand, and so this is what you end up with if you have a rather unsteady hand like me. So this is not the selection that I would want for this particular activity. I'm going to go ahead and deselect. I'm going to do a Control D or Command D if you're on a Mac. The next one is the polygonal lasso tool. I really like this tool, and I think it's a particularly useful one for this activity. I'm first going to go down to my zoom tool, and I'm going to zoom into the letter F here. Now I'm going to use my hand now to click and move the item. Now let's take a look at what happens when I use my rectangular marquee. Well, that's not the shape that I'm looking for. I'm going to deselect by doing Control D. I'm going to go back to this lasso tool, and this time I'm going to choose the polygonal lasso tool. Now this is particularly useful because it allows me to click and point from one point to the next. So I can go in and click and point and click from edge to edge that I want to create. It also allows me to create a nice straight edge. In this particular case, because I have a very clearly defined geometric shape, it allows me to make my selection. And I am still doing this rather quickly. You can take your time and do a nice job with it. You can now see that my selection is exactly my letter. I don't have anything around it. I don't have any extras that I don't want. But I do see over here that I didn't come very close to that letter. I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer to get to that area. You can see here that I shaved off a little bit of the edge here. It wasn't really my intention. So now what I'd really like to do is I'd like to go back to my lasso tool, the polygonal lasso tool, and I'd like to add to it. I'm going to go back to that tool, and over here, when you look at my options, I have Create a New Selection, and I have Add to Selection. I also have Subtract from Selection. So if I wanted to, once again, remove something, I'm on Subtract, and I could do that. Let's just give it a try. I'm just going to go in, click, and you can see that I've chopped out a section. That wasn't what I had intended on doing. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to click on Add to Selection. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to pick up from this point, go up a little higher, and select from this edge, and join it in with this. Now I'm going to go back here and go back to where I started. Now I excluded here, so I want to add this in, and all I'm doing is including the areas that I've excluded in the previous attempt. I can do this all the way around. I look over here and I go, well, I grabbed more than I didn't grab enough here, so I want to kind of cut out that little black line that I have here. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to subtract from my selection, and I'm going to grab it, and there I've subtracted from my selection. And I can take a look at the edges all along and play around and make sure that I have a nice clean selection. Once I'm happy with this, I'm just going to Control minus or Command minus to zoom out a little bit. Now you can see my marching ants around my letter F, and this is exactly what I'm looking to do for this particular activity. So I'm going to do a Control C to copy it, and I'm going to do a Control V. Automatically, my selection disappears. But if I go up here to the Move tool, I'll be able to see that I actually do have a selection, and I have transform controls that are present. If you take a look at my background layer and my layer 1, I can see that I do actually have something here. Now, it's not really easy to see, so let's wink off our background layer. Now I can see that I have the letter F on its own layer. So in order for me to identify this with ease, I'm just going to double click on layer 1 and change this to F. So now I've renamed my layer F. I have a background layer that I'm going to wink back on, and I'm ready to work on my next letter. I'm going to create a word call. I'm just going to do a 4-letter word, fine, I think F-I-N-E. So I'm going to go over here to my zoom tool, and I might see what else I've got here in the way of letters. Actually, let's zoom out. I'm going to do a control minus. Let's zoom out. And let's see if we can isolate a nice letter I. I have a few to choose from. I've got one here. I've got one here. I've got a capital I here. So I've got a few to choose from if I wanted to. I could even get a little bit creative and choose one of these and create maybe an O on top if I wanted to as the dot. However you wish, go ahead and be creative. I'm going to go ahead and select this letter I here. I'm going to zoom in at that letter. Okay, so now I want to show you another great tool. Let's go over here to the toolbar, and I want to show you this third selection. These quick selections, there's a quick selection and a magic wand tool, and each of these do some pretty great things. Of all of the tools that you use in Photoshop, quick selection and magic wand are really great because they do a lot of the hard work for you. The quick selection tool actually allows you to select a shape based on edges, so based on color, texture, and similarity of pixels. The magic wand tool, however, allows you to select only shapes based on color and brightness. In that case, this one's a particularly good one to use because I'm isolating pixels that are light blue from the ones that are dark blue. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the magic wand tool. Now when I go into the magic wand tool, it wants me to select a particular area, but first I always have to make sure that I'm on my background layer. If I'm not on my background layer, if I'm on my layer F, and I start to use a selection tool, it thinks I want to select from this layer, which actually looks like this. So when I'm using the quick selection tool, or any of the quick selection tools, or the magic wand in this case, I want to make sure that I'm on my background layer. So let's go ahead. I'm going to just go in and I'm going to click starting with this dot. So I'm just going to go in and click. Now this works beautifully, but it works beautifully because I have such a high contrast between the two. But look how simply it works. And now I want to make sure that I'm on Add to Selection up here in my Options toolbar, which I am. And I want to go in and click this next selection. Now it automatically converts this to a really nice, lovely selection with all the beautiful edges nicely selected. But I do want to show you one more thing. Up here in the Options toolbar, I have Anti-Alias selected. Anti-Alias removes all the jagged edges caused by the immediate pixels on your edges in your images. So if you don't want pixel edges to look like staircases, you want to choose Anti-Alias because Photoshop will then impose some nice soft hues in and around jagged edges so that you don't have those awful staircase looking pixels. Okay, so now I'm ready to copy and paste. So I'm going to do a Control C and a Control V. Again, for those of you on a Mac, you're going to do a Control C, or Command C rather, and a Command V. So now let's go over to layer 1, which I know is my letter I because I have F here. So I'm going to double click on layer 1 and I'm going to call this I. Maybe I'll just do a lowercase I since it kind of looks like a lowercase I. Now let's turn off the background and see how it looks. Now I could go in here and I could play around a little bit. I'm going to go a little bit closer. You can see here that I've got some edges that aren't really great. I could play around with that a little bit to make it nice and clean, but just for today's illustration, I'm just going to leave it as is. If I did want to, I would go back into the background layer. I could zoom out a little bit more just so that I can see a little bit more clearly. And then I might take my selection, and again I would use the plus and minus. I would add to selection, subtract this from selection until I got some really nice clean edges. Okay, so let's go on to our next letter. I'm going to use the zoom tool, or I'm going to use Control minus to zoom out, and I'm going to choose the letter N. So in this case, I'm going to go over here, I'm going to use this letter N, and I'm going to zoom in. This is a perfect example of being able to decide which type of selection tool will work for which type of letter. In this particular case, if I used the magic wand tool, let's make sure that I'm on my background first, and I started to click within here, watch what would happen to the letter N. Not great. So here's a perfect example of how I might use the polygonal tool. I'm going to go back to the polygonal tool, but before I do, I'm going to deselect what I've just selected. So I'm going to do a Control D or Command D to deselect. So now I'm going to go over to my polygonal tool again. I'm going to use polygonal lasso tool, and I'm going to start selecting. Now again, I'm going to do this very quickly for the sake of the demonstration, but be a little bit more careful about it. Now you'll notice that as I was going around the edges, I had to click multiple times to get a nice smooth edge, and you'll notice that I'm going to bypass the middle of this N altogether. I'll show you afterwards why I'm doing that, but right now I'm just going to quickly select my edges, and now I'm going to remove the middle selection. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to select subtract from selection. I'm going to start at the bottom, click on, and start clicking in. I'm going to navigate around this, and again I'm going to make multiple selections around the curve and finish it off. So now once again I'll be able to make a copy, Control or Command C, and Control or Command V, and now I can see layer 1. I'm just going to put an N there. Let's wink off my background so I can have a look at how it looks. Not too bad. I now have 3 out of my 4 letters. I now need to do my final letter. I'm going to wink back on my background. I'm going to zoom out again, and I'm going to find my final letter. I need a nice letter E. Most of my letters so far have been kind of a bluish color, so I could look for another blue to be, you know, kind of consistent, or I could, yeah, you know what, I will. I think I'm going to select this one here. I'm going to select this E here. I'm going to zoom in. And I think for this one, again, I'm going to use the magic wand tool. And I'm just going to go ahead, and it does it nicely for me. I'm going to do Control C and a Control V, and I'm going to go over here to layer 1, rename this as an E. All right, let's zoom out completely. I now have F-I-N-E. I now have 4 letters. These 4 letters I want to resize and place on a ruler. But before I do that, I need to get rid of this background layer. Now, as we learned in a previous video, all I need to do for a background layer to get rid of it is to double-click to rename it. I'm going to double-click, turn it into a regular layer, and say OK. And now I'm going to make sure that I have that selection on, not one of the other ones I want to keep, and I'm going to hit the little trash can right here, and I'm going to completely delete the layer. Delete the layer, yes. And now I'm ready to start placing rulers and creating a 4-letter word using rulers and guides to make everything sized perfectly.